Recently, the President of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, gave a very powerful speech where he declared boldly to those present, as well as to the rest of the world, that he is not afraid of dying. Listening to President Traore say these words did not only bring goosebumps and reminded us of Nelson Mandela's "I am prepared to die" speech, but it also brought this question to mind: why would Traore publicly say these words? Has he been threatened? Well, if President Traore has been threatened, we know where the threats would have come from: the West. History tells us that it is one of the trademarks of the West, at least when it comes to ensuring that their influence all over Africa is maintained. But what exactly is the content of Traore's speech, and how does it relate to the West? Let's find out. It is a well-known fact that the West wants an Africa that is underdeveloped, not making progress, completely dependent on the West, and filled with insecurity, poverty, and wars. This is because as long as the continent remains like this, it would be very easy to control and exploit. Now, one of the ways that the West has ensured that the African continent remains like this is through its leaders. History and reports tells us that the West are very much involved in the political affairs of the continent, because once the leaders of Africa are Western allies, it would be very easy to maintain their influence in the continent. The West is so much involved in Africa's political affairs, so much so that some Western leaders have plotted and manipulated the election process in some African countries to put leaders that will serve their interest. It's shocking, but it's actually quite common, and the West have succeeded in putting leaders that will serve their interests. Now, history also tells us that in cases where the leader is not Western allied, the West resort to other tactics to ensure that that leader complies. One such tactic is assassination. Of course, they don't start off with assassination. First, they will try to persuade the leader to conform to their policy and standards with promises and pledges, and when that doesn't work, they begin to paint the leader in a bad light. The West does this through the aid of Western media, creating a picture and a narrative that the African leader is a dictator and is not fit for governance. This finally leads to the last stage, which is assassination, which can be done by orchestrating coups or militarily intervening in the country. There are many examples of African leaders that have been eliminated this way. If you recall, Thomas Sankara was assassinated in a coup orchestrated by Blaise Compaoré with the backing of France. After the coup, Blaise went ahead to become the President of Burkina Faso and ruled for the next 21 years, and not surprisingly, he was a known ally of France. Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated after NATO militarily intervened in Libya, leading to the current chaos and destabilization experienced in Libya till today. Gaddafi and Sankara, as well as many others, were eliminated by the West because they refused to be puppets in the hands of Western government. These tactics of the West to keep African leaders under their thumbs have made the majority of African leaders to be weak and, out of fear for their lives, have decided to be puppets of the West. However, in a bold speech, President Ibrahim Traore has publicly declared that he is not like those African leaders who are weak and unpatriotic. In his speech, he opposed the cowardice, treachery, and incompetence of African leaders, as well as the long-standing intimidation tactic of the West. He said, "Let me tell you that in order for us to come together, we need to eliminate 3 words, that is, 3 main vices from our actions and our lives. I refer to ineptitude, treachery, and cowardice." Now, if you think deeply on Traore's statement, you would observe that these 3 characteristics, treachery, cowardice, and incompetence, is what has indeed impeded the growth of Africa's unity and progress, and kept the continent still under the influence of the West decades after independence. Let's analyze each of these traits deeply, beginning with cowardice. If you observe the leadership of African countries from the West to the East and South to the North, you would observe this trait of cowardice among the leaders. We say cowardice in the sense that most of the leaders, from the president down to the least political leader, lack the courage to stand against oppressive government and the influence of the West. In addition, Cowardice also means that these African leaders are afraid of losing the privilege that comes with their position and prefer to have security and wealth at the expense of the sovereignty of their nations. Knowing this, the West have capitalized on this trait to make generations of African leaders submit to their demands and preserve their interests in the continent. African leaders may come out to blast the West during summits, but behind the scenes, the truth is the majority of them are cowards. They do not have the backbone to truly stand for African unity and progress. Those that had the courage, like Gaddafi and Sankara, were eliminated. The next trait prevalent among African leaders is treachery or betrayal. In fact, this is a deeply rooted issue that didn't just start after Africa got independence, but can even been traced back to the transatlantic slave trade era. If you recall, some of the Africans sold to slavery were sold by African traditional leaders for guns, wine, and mirrors. This act of betraying one another for one's own benefit has permeated deeply into the system and is impeding African unity. Think about it. How were those courageous African leaders who truly wanted to fight against imperialism killed? Simply through their fellow Africans. Who invited NATO to militarily intervene in Libya, which gave them the opportunity to kill Gaddafi? African leaders and political figures in Libya. Who killed Thomas Sankara? Blaise Compaoré, good friend of Sankara and an African leader. Right from time, the West has capitalized on this trait and used it to maintain influence over the continent. They come in, promising one weak and greedy African leader financial and security benefits, and that leader turns its back against African unity. It is very important that for Africa to break free, it needs to have leaders that would put the needs of the general collective above personal needs. Finally, the trait of incompetence. Without mincing words, the majority of African leaders are incompetent, are not fit for the job, and do not deserve to be called leaders. Most of them got into power just because they want the title and see it as a way to get wealth. They do not have the necessary experience and qualification necessary to rule a country, and we are not just talking about having a formal education. We are talking about knowing the right decision to take at every time, being compassionate, having intelligence to negotiate with other leaders, and many more leadership qualities. It is this incompetence that has made African leaders to sell the continent's resources for peanuts to the West and allowed the West to exploit the continent for decades. It is this incompetence that has made African leaders to continuously sign agreements that are only beneficial to the other party. It is also this incompetence that has made Africa to remain dependent on foreign aid and financial assistance from the West, leading to the narrative that the African continent needs to be helped always. This incompetence has put the African continent in huge debt, made the youth flee to the West in search of greener pastures, and impeded the overall progress of the entire continent. Honestly, we do not know which of the three traits is worse, but one thing is sure, all three combined have been weaponized into a tool by the West to keep the continent under their thumb. However, this is why President Traore said that if Africa is going to be united, then there is a need to do away with these three traits. President Traore is determined to be different and is raising his voice for the need for a new set of leaders in Africa who will prioritize the needs of their people above their personal needs. He is calling for leaders that are patriotic and are ready to uphold the sovereignty of their country no matter what. This is why Traore said that he is ready to die for this cause. What a leader. By making this statement publicly, President Traore is weakening one of the most potent instruments used by the West to keep the continent under its thumb. But that's not all. Traore is also charging those African leaders who are weak and incompetent, reminding them of their duty and responsibility to African unity. The fact is that the West fears African unity because it is the path that would lead to the continent's progress and freedom from their influence. African leaders need to wake up and do away with these three traits so that the continent can be on its way to progress. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.